This podcast is brought to you by AppsFlyer. In today's digital world, understanding your app's journey from discovery to download is more than just insightful, it's essential. Enter AppsFlyer, the leader in mobile attribution and marketing analytics that allows you to measure the full potential of your marketing efforts, making every ad dollar work smarter. With AppsFlyer, that's your new reality. Dive deep into data-driven insights that reveal exactly where your users come from and how they'll interact with your app. AppsFlyer, where your app's potential meets performance. Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Games 303, where we read and distill all the weekly game industry news so you don't have to. Here's what we got going on today. Really, really big week. I thought that our biggest topic was going to be Epic versus Google. Yeah, Epic coming out on top and that lawsuit. But really, the biggest news was the hit piece on Roblox. Now, by the Heisenberg research folks. So they're branding them as the pedophile hellscape. So we'll get into why they say that later on. We're going to also touch on Squadbusters since Mishka's back and we can go over your article and I can chime in. And then Adam's got a great topic around toxic positivity. I can't wait to get into that. So we're going to be a little lighter on our quick hits to get to those bigger stories. So I'm Jen Donahoe, strategic marketing consultant at Jade Inferno and Beta Hat. And today we have Eric Kress, principal at Gossamer Consulting Group.
Yo.
Mishka Katkoff, founder of Deconstructor of Fun.
Hello.
And Adam Telfer, the product guy.
Yeah, that's right. See everybody.
Oh, I need a better name for you than the product guy, but it's fine. All right. So, Kress, did you want to banter a bit about an event?
Yeah, we had the Bitcraft event, the annual shareholder meeting event in San Francisco, which was cool to see everybody. Scary neighborhood. They had it at a very, very sketchy neighborhood in San Francisco that has not quite gotten better since the pandemic, but these guys really know how to throw an event. Like, I think Jen should teach like some kind of masterclass in promoting venture capital firms because he's really good at it. So if you've never been to a VC conference, it's like a mix of LP investors as well as portfolio companies. And it's generally kind of a circle jerk, a promotion of investments to investors. But for me, it's a great opportunity to see kind of where the puck is going from an investment perspective. And to no one's surprise, the whole conference was about AI this year. I don't even think blockchain was mentioned once, or mobile for that matter, right? Except maybe some distribution strategies, but I don't remember actually anybody talking about blockchain, as a matter of fact, come to think of it. Yeah. I caught up with Alex Takai, who has now forgiven me for my insolence around anime.
Alex Takei.
Whatever.
Say her name right. She's awesome.
No, of course she's awesome. I had lunch with her. She's great. She's one of my faves. Ryan, who is the drunk German who asked me if my outrage would make me explode into a supernova. He was there. Yost? I spent it. I did it right that time. And Aaron, who gave the keynote, and a bunch of other gaming folks were there. Thanks to Jens, Jasper, and Nico for the invite. Next year, I think it's in Singapore next year, inshallah. So we'll see if we can get there.
Oh man, that sounds awesome. Yeah.
Well, did you speak at the event?
No, not this time.
Oh,
I did like 2 years ago in New York. I did the keynote.
I think they wanted the conference to be more positive, thinking about the future. They didn't want Kress to just...
I spoke at the Play Venture event. So the venture capital, the way, if I'm correct, it has to do at least once a year a meeting where it does a meeting for the LPs or the investors, or at least the biggest investor. So that's what they hold it. And usually they bundle it together. So there might have been a smaller meeting that is only for the LPs. And then they usually do a summit at the same time where they invite portfolio companies and friends of the fund, like Mr. Kress.
Yeah, the LP meeting was early in the morning, but the LPs were still there.
Well,
all right.
Okay.
Mishka.
Little shill. So on the podcast, we had Savvy Games Group CEO, Brian Ward, fellow Canadian, Adam. So I thought it was an interesting conversation, but I'm going to quote Philip Black. This is his message. Saudi one was really good. You stayed on the Saudi topic, and I think it was eye-opening for a lot of people. That was his quote. He sent me this today. So take Philip Black's word for it. We stayed on the topic. And then next week, we got the product guys, boss's boss, on the podcast. So you can figure out who that one is, filmed on site in Barcelona. So stay tuned, subscribe to the YouTube.
Yeah, that's gonna be. I also listened to your Savvy podcast. Well done. I did learn a lot, actually. It was interesting to get a different take on what's going on there and how things might be different than a lot of Westerners perceive. And so I learned a lot. Good job, Mishka.
Thank
Jen's
you so
approval.
much. Thank you. I do this for approvals. But Jen, what's going on in LA?
All right. So LA Tech Week is going on. And San Francisco Tech Week, I think, is now. So next week, there's 2 events that I'm going to be participating in. They're kind of back to back, both of them on October 17th. So A16Z and AppsFlyer asked me to moderate a panel on game growth, taking your game from 0 to 1 million. So lots of folks are already signing up for that. Really interesting. I pulled in Cody Christie, who is head of growth and UA at Riot, to be one of the panel members, along with AppsFlyer and A16Z folks. Also, Planet Play is doing another gaming community happy hour. That is at the Google Spruce Goose headquarters, the best building ever in the history of headquarters. So for both of those, sign up. We'll put links in the show notes. I'll also throw it into the Slack. There's limited room, so check those out. Oh, and then I forgot, different event, Games Forum SF on October 22nd to 23rd. Cress, Laura, and I are going to be on a panel at the end of the day on the 22nd, where we basically go to all of the conference meetings all day and then talk shit about them at the very end. I'm just kidding. We're going to summarize them and give our own insights in a positive and insightful manner. Right, Chris?
No, not me. No
Okay,
way.
that's what I thought.
Positive. Forget it.
Again, we'll put the link in the show note. Use code DOF25 at checkout for a 25% discount. And then come say hi. I think it'll be a lot of fun to see everyone in San Francisco. Corrections. Is it 1 week without a correction? I'm sure we should apologize for something, right?
Well, after this one, for sure.
No. Yeah. Here we go. All right. So just a couple of quick headlines. First, Epic Games is lowering its royalty fee to 3.5% from 5% for games made in Unreal Engine and released on launch day on the Epic Game Store. They're still trying to figure out how to motivate people to do more on the store. It's called Launch Everywhere with Epic. This includes mobile. iOS is the exception. Obviously, Epic is waiving the same-day release requirement due to Apple's core technology fee. And then Phil and I have been chatting about what's going on in Japan. And so he sent an update from CISA, which says that Japan's PC gaming market almost tripled in size from 2019 to 2023. It's up to 1.6 billion from last year. So the home of Nintendo is actually seeing a lot of growth in the PC gaming market. So it's interesting to see that. All right, let's move on to a little bit of drama going on with Ubisoft. I mean, this is the story that keeps giving. So
we just started following just to get Crest triggered, but this kind of turned into a real story. The shock of it this week was the Chinese gaming giant Tencent plans to acquire stake in France-based gaming company Ubisoft from Guimond family. So what's happening with Ubisoft, from what I'm hearing in the Zeitgeist, is that there's a discussion from Guimond family to taking it private, right?
That was the announcement that shut it up 30%, right?
Yeah. And why is that?
That was bullshit, like rumor from Bloomberg. We don't know whether or not that's true. And they put together a press release basically saying that, there's nothing special going on right now. It's what they kind of have to do as a public company. But the investment that Tencent made ages ago was based upon the idea that they would secure more ownership for the family through Tencent, right? So that they would have even more control, so that if a hostile bidder came out, they would be able to control whether the company would sell or not. So we've been talking about this forever. It was the most absurd and gross misuse of fiduciary duty from a management team that I've ever seen. The notion that the company going private is interesting. It's possible that happens. There's such a low price, but that would absolutely fuck over all the shareholders of the company. Like, that would just destroy the shareholders. But it'd be good for Eve because he can manage that stuff manage his company into the ground,
But why did the stock go up? Like after that hint of the news, the stock shot up by 40% in a day.
Well, the idea is that a private equity firm or a consortium of buyers or strategics would buy the company for a premium to where it is right now, and so the stock goes up, right? My sense is that this is a leak on Bloomberg from some shareholder who's like fucking lost their ass. I mean, that's my speculation. I have no fucking idea, right? But like, that makes sense to me. But, you know, the thing is the timing is really odd because the stock has gotten destroyed and there's no real timing to like get a process going and for this type of thing to leak. So it feels a lot more concocted by a shareholder than it is like from the company.
But such a happy group of shareholders. It's not like they write shit post them publicly.
Yeah. But look, I mean, I was thinking about it after. I don't even know if a PE firm makes sense. Like this is too small for a lot of the bigger PE firms. It's really hard to underwrite. It makes more sense for strategic. Like I said last week, I mean, Savvy should just take the money out of the mattress and buy these guys, you know, like, or Tencent should just buy them outright if it's possible. But that wouldn't really help them. What they need is a new management team, as I've said a million times, like Frank Gibeau, Owen Mahoney, like get one of those guys to manage this thing and fix it.
To manage a French company, hire an American? Are you serious?
That's the only way they're going to get better, right? These guys don't know how to run companies. Like,
there's not going to be any cultural shock when a Yank comes into Paris.
It's a cultural shock. I mean, and I hate to say this, and this is not a very popular thing. They need to remove like 20 to 40% of the staff. Like, this is not like they're in the shit right now, right? Like, they need to cut costs and get profitable, right? If they ever want to get public. But the reason that like a Tencent and Saudi makes sense is because they don't have those kind of considerations. They can take more of their time and run it unprofitably because what do the Saudis care, right? They're loaded, right? And Tencent will be more flexible and forgiving, I think, generally speaking, than a PE firm who needs to exit in 3 to 5 years. And so a PE firm would just annihilate that company in theory, would cull the herd in an aggressive way. But I think a strategic would make more sense to keep kind of the kumbaya of a French company.
To summarize, Cress, it's either strategic or a Ted Lasso should arrive and basically fucking coach this company.
We've discussed this to death. Like, what's clear is that the company needs new management, right? There's absolutely
Ted
no
Lasso.
doubt about that. It's just a question of how that happens.
You're so proud of yourself, Mishka, right now for your Ted Lasso.
I'm just thinking about, like, in my head, I'm seeing an American arriving on a private jet to Paris, like, bonjour, motherfuckers, let's get this company rolling. And then they just wrap this up. Like, no more of this bullshit. Let's get transactional, guys.
I mean, it would be better for that kind of person than a PE company who would cut it to the bone.
I just find it funny, but I'm just imagining it in my hand because, you know, the Parisians are Parisian.
I mean, the paddles are out. Like, I mean, like they get a like electric shock. This company, I mean, there's got to be something big that happens.
Yes, the CEO needs to be Texan and wear cowboy boots.
I'll send him my Dallas Cowboys helmet.
Moving on to Brawl Stars.
All right.
Let's talk about
Mishka.
it. Yeah, so Squadbusters, just in short, we had an article. Adam, thank you for providing feedback on that as well. So in that article, Squadbusters, basically we wrote about how it struggled to match Brawl Stars' success despite these 40 million pre-registrations and the massive hype. Post-launch performance of Squadbusters has felt short compared to Brawl Stars for key reasons, and those 4 key reasons in the article were lack of gameplay diversity, so the notion of accessibility versus depth. So it's a very easy game to get into, but at the moment there hasn't been that much depth to keep the players going and spending. The progression has been quite shallow in the Squadbusters compared to Brawl Stars that offers really a multiple different vectors, and through that offers various resources such as credits, tokens, coins, constantly motivating players to play in a different way and achieve next steps. And then the kind of an end piece, which Jen did not contribute to and should have, is the premature launch. So this is a surprising thing because, you know, I've done a couple of travels and I do talk to people outside of my garage, and like everybody keeps asking the same question, like, why did they launch this game? Like nobody really understands what the fuck happened. even companies close to that company and close to that team. So they skipped the soft launch. Essentially, when they came into the soft launch, they were already going towards the launch. It was just like, it was a sidestep, not even a sidestep. It was nothing. They were just going towards the global launch, and it was just a formality. And that kind of led to this unpolished product, not in terms of how it looks, but how it performs. And after that, relatively weak kind of a post-launch roadmap. We haven't seen anything major happening. Like there was a Transformers event, but that really didn't do much. And so we did not cover the marketing aspect. And Jen, as a go-to-market expert, what would have you said about the marketing? More money on the brand.
Not necessarily. So first of all, my philosophy in all of this is that game teams and marketing teams need to be one team, one dream. And where you can align everyone against common goals really helps make sure that everyone's doing the right thing for the overall success of the game and the product. I think we've moved on from the typical AEM funnel, which is, hey, marketing, you go worry only about acquisition, product, you only worry about, the middle and engagement and, PMs and monetization, like economy folks like Phil, you just only worry about like converting people to spend money. And I think we're a flywheel now, and we kind of combine everybody together where we have to care about everything. So the reason why I'm kind of adamant about this is, I come from doing this where we did it at Scopely, which was really, really helpful that we were all kind of on this together, where, at Scopely and what they've actually done on Monopoly Go is you soft launch the hell out of it. You really understand that you put it in the oven and you bake it until it's fully ready. No raw cookie dough here. You make sure that all of your KPIs are kind of in line before you go bigger. So there's a lot to unpack, and there's a lot of different elements. So I'm only going to pick kind of two of the biggest things that I think worked really well, and one thing that worked well and one thing that didn't. So the pre-reg campaign. There's a video, I'll post it in the show notes and put it out there, which walks you through how you could actually pre-register for Squadbusters inside of any of the Supercell games. And so on Android, this is a brand new feature that I think launched with Squadbusters. If you're one of a bigger company, you could probably reach out to your Google Play folks and say, hey, how do I do this? So inside of Heyday, inside of Brawl Stars, you could go in and you had this pop-up that said, if you pre-register for Squadbusters, there are milestone rewards for you to earn stuff in the game that you care about and that you're playing. And so that's how they racked up 40 million pre-registrations, because I don't care about Squadbusters. I want my chicken in the Heyday, app, or I want the Primo in Brawl Stars. Why wouldn't you just click that button and get your milestone reward? And so, amazing. What an acquisition channel that they had. Now, the other thing that they did was they hid all of the milestone numbers. So you didn't know exactly how many you had to hit to unlock that reward. So it kept a little bit of FOMO, like what happens if they weren't hitting their numbers? And so brilliant to put little question marks. And when you hit the milestone, look, we've unlocked a milestone. Isn't that amazing, everybody? Well done on that. So the thing that was super challenging for them and the fail was that if you can't convert those 40 million people into a game that has KPIs that are actually working, it's called the leaky bucket. And so for me, the fail was not necessarily the fact that they decided to do a really big trailer with Thor as the barbarian. I respect and give them a lot of kudos for taking a shot at this old school marketing. I might disagree on the amount of the investment. We think it was between $15-20 million to just pay the talent and make the creative, let alone what they gave Jeff Keighley a lot of money to put it on Summer Game Fest and things like that. But I think it was the wrong time. The product wasn't ready for that kind of effort. So I think there's a new formula in kind of launching these games, which is you can't just do the AAA, we're going to launch, and so we're going to spend all the money right on day one. You kind of can't do that if you're not going to be able to convert those people in. So for me, it's slow and steady wins the race, kind of like the tortoise and the hare. You got to have the social features and everything to kind of convert. So there's so much more, but those are the two things.
But in general, why do you think many teams get enamored with this approach? This isn't the only game that has attempted this. And I think there are other teams that have been considering more of this type of AAA launch without effectively soft launching for long enough. And I think last week when you guys had the podcast, you were talking about Genshin Impact. And I think like why game devs don't do the same thing. And I think this is kind of the same thing. Like Genshin launched 2 SKUs without really soft launching on PC console, a little bit of soft launch on mobile, and did the impossible. And then you look at something like COD Mobile, where I think even when we had the podcast on COD Mobile, we were looking at it being like, the retention doesn't look strong. RPI does not look strong. Why are they globally launching COD Mobile? And they stuck the landing, right? And I think PC console live services do this too. Like my interpretation of why this happens is I think people get enamored with this approach because of survivorship bias. So they point to Apex Legends, COD Mobile, Genshin, instead of understanding all the failures. And I think this one's a big enough one that I think it'll shake people, but I think that's also why people get enamored. The teams believe that in order to generate the hype for those massive install outcomes, you can't do these big, long soft launches. The hype dies down. Many people get their hands on it anyways because it's relatively easy to pick up the game in another market anyways. So how do you still build up that same hype? And I think when people get enamored with like that approach, it becomes difficult for somebody on the team to stand up and say, well, what if the game is bad? What if the game is a leaky bucket? Then the team is in full-blown toxic positivity mode, which we'll cover later. But yeah, Jen, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that, it's a good point. And I'm seeing kind of 3 different ways that companies are coming to market. And it's also very different in the East. So when you look at the MiHoYo verse and what they did with Zenless Zone Zero, they had 3 closed betas. The first one was a week, the second one was 4 weeks, and the third one was only 3 weeks. Then you got what Squadbusters did, which was a bunch of closed betas. And then I guess they said, they're like, we're in soft launch. And then on day 2 of the soft launch, they said, we're launching in a month. So I don't even know if I would count that hybrid model as a true hybrid, but it could have been an option for them. And then, obviously looking at what Monopoly Go did, which is the traditional Scopely soft launch, which is tech test first in, the Philippines. And then I think what they're doing differently is what I loved about the model. They looked at tier 1 countries that could best represent the US. So they looked at the Netherlands and Norway. And when they got to the point where things were looking good, they started to scale in those smaller countries to see if they could generate that interest that you're talking about. And so for a couple of months, they were scaling in the Nordics. They saw it was working. KPIs looked good. Then they're like, okay, let's up it in France. And saw that was looking good. And then they went for the global launch. And that's really about turning on UA. And by the way, and even in the challenges with IDFA, UA still has a huge role to play in launching the games. For me, like that is the new way to launch a game, looking at how Monopoly Go really decided to scale in a single country to understand that the KPIs were there to be able to do it.
That feels like a very traditional mobile soft launch approach,
Yep.
which obviously I'm very aligned with. I think that's the right approach for mobile. But then when we look at Zenless Zone, when you look at Squadbusters and the type of game that they're building and the type of launch that they were trying to create, where they believed that it was much more about driving hype and they wanted that big splash moment, right? That's where things came an issue. And like something like Squadbusters didn't do a soft launch. The version of their soft launch was they did these closed betas. And I don't think those closed betas are actually terribly predictive of what will happen when the mass market plays the game. I think it can be predictive of golden cohorts, but I don't think it's predictive of scaled. So like, to me, I'm like, I look at Zenless and I look at Squadbusters and I'm like, I don't think those 2 paths are viable right now. So what is the right approach when you're not sort of like a casual game on mobile, when you're trying to go for these much bigger hype games like Squadbusters, Zenless, Genshin, Apex?
Yeah, no, I think it's some sort of hybrid that has closed betas to get the feedback from players to start to get their interest. And then, my reco would be to do more with the soft launch. Like, I think if Squadbusters had actually done a little bit more and then held their fire on their bigger awareness until they knew it was resonating, that's what I would have done. But, there's a little bit of hindsight.
They would have done a longer soft launch period. So that
Yeah.
But the soft launch specifically, that phase would have lasted significantly longer, you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we're all saying, right? Mishka, you too. I mean, I think all of us were scratching our head of like, why didn't you all leave that out? Like, what was the downside?
How in the fuck do we not know why this happened, right? This is so uncharacteristic of Supercell. There must have been a reason from an executive perspective or investor perspective, something that pushed them to release this thing way too early. Like, it doesn't even make sense, like, that they did this.
That's what my question was around, like, how people get enamored with that approach. Like, why do they all of a sudden say, like, soft launches aren't worth it anymore? We need to put every dollar down before we've got this data. I think it's because you get enamored with that Genshin.
I've heard stupid stories, and I've heard like to some hypothesis that I kind of would believe. The basic hypothesis was just that they've done a lot of long soft launches. Clash Mini was 2 years, Clash Quest was year and a half, and so forth. And this was some of the hypothesis that was given from people because of the company not working at the company, but they were just saying like the management was just like, hey, let's fucking go. Let's put in a date and let's launch a game. And let's get everybody behind it. We love this game. I remember visiting the offices and people were wearing the hoodies. And I was like, can I get a hoodie? Because I was like enjoying playing the game. I was like, give me a Squadbusters. Like after like first couple of weeks, I really loved the game. And I was on board. Like I was hyping this game up. I was saying, this is going to be $1 billion game. So I was drinking the Kool-Aid, and I imagine being there and just, you know, like we're going to fucking do this. Like finally, we're going to release a game. It has all our characters. It's a fun game. Everybody enjoys it. And maybe there was some toxic positivity going on where, right, Adam, where people just did not voice out. Like there could have been some toxic positivity. That
Well,
could
there's
be it.
disagreeing commit too, right? Like if you're saying that leadership was like, let's go, I mean, you got to just get on the train at that point as a worker.
Like Jen, I'll say this. I knew that this game is going to launch before it was in soft launch. Like I heard, you know, from a bunch of people, even from platforms that we use to promote it, big channels, that this is coming. And this was before soft launch.
So who's responsible and who's getting fired? That's all I want to know.
I want to.
How would we know?
Is this a CEO problem? I mean, like, what is happening?
No.
No, it's just like all I knew from the beginning was that everybody's excited, and I was excited. I'm not shitting on this game at all. I was super excited, and I get it. I was drinking the Kool-Aid. I was in the party. I was like, let's fucking go. But this was determined before soft launch. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, hopefully they learned their lesson.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can't will it into being.
Mm.
And I think, you know, they had so many failures in their soft launches. I think they just decided, they're like, well, you know, we're going to stop listening and we're just going to do it.
Do it.
And I think that going big is cool, but you can only go big if you're ready.
Yeah.
And
say what you mean, Jim. It's cool, but it's stupid.
Well, yeah, no, I would have waited. I mean, I think I've told the story before, but when I joined Zynga on Farmville, there was a TV commercial that was in testing. And it was kind of at the birth of mobile. And you know, it was fine. It was okay. But I was looking at the numbers for the retention of the game, and I was like, oh my God, why on earth are we going to drive people to this game when the retention is where it is? And so luckily, the test market numbers weren't that great. And so I was like, let's pause everything on doing this TV campaign because the numbers aren't there. We have a leaky bucket. And so I think that's where, if you're a true marketing partner, you're not out to do cool shit, that you're truly concerned and your results match the results of the team, your marketing partner should come to you and say, not sure we're ready to do something like that. And like, I'm not blaming the marketing partner at all, but I'm just saying, align all of these things up when the game is ready. Yeah. Everyone has to fire at the same time.
I'll just do one insight from me. We have in the biggest newspaper of Finland, which is tiny, was 5 million people, but nevertheless, we have main newspaper, and Supercell was doing a victory lap like before this game went out on soft launch. Like, maybe it was before, or maybe it was during the first week, but they did like the interviews and everything. Like, this is fucking like again, I was all in. They called me from the newspaper. I'm like, yeah, this game looks really good. I've been playing it for a week. I was like, I have nothing bad to say. So just saying that I drank the Kool-Aid as anybody, but they were doing a victory lap.
You and Phil did the whole like
Yeah.
cast on like,
Yeah.
this is great.
Yeah, and
I think-
Matthew's the real consultant. He was like, I don't think this game is
I
that
don't
great. And shut the
know.
fuck up, Matthew. This is awesome.
The metrics in soft launch were fucking terrible. They were
Yeah.
absolutely terrible. That's why Philip, I don't even understand why Philip got all on the bandwagon on this, because if you could just look, the RPI at these tier 1 countries were
And I think it's
terrible.
easy to get enamored and easy to get sucked up in the hype. It's the same thing
Right.
in PC
Yeah.
console. You look at any of these games that have these amazing betas and people get excited before launch.
But it
It
wasn't
gets-
an amazing beta. I think that's
the
I mean,
point, right?
that's the
So,
point.
No, sorry, I'm talking about other games. But in the case of Squadbusters, you're in the pre-launch phase. Miska's able to actually play it. It's easy to get caught up in that hype.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to put on like real objective lenses and be able to cut off like beyond the hype. What do we think this is actually going to
Exactly. And Adam, I was in the situation where because Supercell has done always very rigorous testing and always kills at babies. So I was like, if this game looks that they're launching it even before soft launch, this must have banger retention numbers, like something where this has never been done before. Like they're seeing absolute miracles, and they had their chief design officer on it and so forth. So I was that influenced my decision making. So I made a mistake with that as well. You've heard of Heroic Labs by now, and we keep talking about them because in today's mature market, you need every edge to be successful. Rather than spending those precious company dollars on building game tech, focus on building your game and shipping it. Get into your players' hands faster and grow your community. Heroic Labs is battle-tested partner and friend of the podcast. Their tech enables you to be flexible, creative, and scale for success. Heroic Labs has your tech stack covered. Whether you're looking for a world-class back-end game server, an amazing game development framework, fantastic live ops tooling, or reliable mass scalability, Heroic Labs has solutions for all of these challenges. And it's not just us at Deconstructor of Fun praising Heroic Labs. The company works with some of the world's biggest publishers on many of the beloved games. Focus on your game, save a big chunk of cheese, and avoid tech risks with Heroic Labs.
Step into the future of game monetization with Xsolla, the premier partner for game developers seeking to expand their reach and revenue. Xsolla provides a robust suite of tools designed to enhance user acquisition, manage subscriptions, and streamline payment solutions worldwide. Unlock new markets and maximize profitability through their customized, secure payment architecture and dedicated support team. Xsolla, powering game developers to achieve global success.
I think that's a good segue then right into talking about toxic positivity. So again, I prefer, even when all of the news is coming out and extremely deep on things like Roblox, I still want to talk about philosophical topics. So Laura Fryer posted on YouTube a video called Culture Killed Concord. If you don't know Laura, you should. She's been in the industry since the late 90s, 21 game credits, including Gears of War, Too Human, Zoo Tycoon, and really an industry legend from Microsoft and Epic Games. An industry legend that has a great YouTube channel and actually talks a lot in detail about her experience in games. So this video speaks about toxic positivity, which is specifically Concord, but let's not retread on Concord. I think it's better to talk about the concept of positivity because I think it's pervasive in games. So many of the games that we've talked about on the podcast over the last year, Concord, Star Wars Outlaws, Suicide Squad, Skull and Bones, Warcraft Rumble, Squadbusters, likely were impacted by toxic positivity. Because to be honest, every studio I've been a part of has toxic positivity. I used it myself when leading games. And I think the interesting topic is more when and why it turns into a toxic culture. So the examples that Laura talks about are when developers either ignore or refuse to seek out feedback from their staff or feedback from customers of the game, and then fail to pivot when the market is signaling strongly that this game will fail. So her examples from her own past were building an MMO when World of Warcraft came out, building Gotham City Imposters when there was clear feedback from players rejecting parts of the concept, specifically characters. So I think toxic positivity happens because game development is fucking hard. like fucking hard. Games go through cycles of really high and really low conviction. And no game would be built if teams had to maintain high conviction throughout the entire production. That just has never happened on hits and not hits. So commonly, you're at prototype, throwing ideas together, everything's amazing, and then production hits, and holy shit, all of our ideas we assumed in prototype are garbage, and now we're pivoting in gaming systems. This happens all the fucking time.
Yeah.
So you're now navigating an extremely difficult production phase where you're trying to pivot systems, getting things to better, and you have this noise of managing a massive team of passionate gamers who also play like a lot of games and each have vastly different opinions about what's going on. So this is where toxic positivity starts to create. And then adding on top of a layer, especially at larger publishers, you have executives that can't understand why the game isn't fixing the problems fast enough. So you've got to manage all of this noise. So leaders adapt. They focus on the positive. They keep the vision of the game strong, and they move momentum forward instead of second guessing every decision. So that's what positivity does. Positivity means progress. So in many cases, that positivity ships actually great games, right? Like when a team finally gets the pieces together, because they've championed the thing, they've got it all at that point, they can iterate quickly in that last cycle, and then the game comes together and things come and become much more positive. And I think those stories become what I hear a lot of in those mid-production, low-conviction states, where it's like, yeah, the game's usually pretty rough right now in this stage, but wait until the next build. Or, hey, yeah, it's bad, but this team shipped X. That came together at the last minute, so hold on. Or, we're X, we've turned this around before, holding on to that Hail Mary. So I think those are the types of statements that points to it. And I think toxicity pours in when it becomes a cult of positivity, where negativity is shunned from staff and from market research, and teams just go very defensive. But I think like the one context around the games we've been talking about, games like Concord, Skull and Bones, these were 8+ year productions. The likely reality is that they were listening to feedback early. They were iterating, they were constantly pivoting. But 5 to 6 years into that production, you're out of time. You're done, right? You now have to start shifting towards closing mode, which means horse blinders are on. You ship this thing. So I bet that the team went into full toxic positivity mode because they needed to ship, and doubting the direction anymore would prevent that. So what do you do about it? Like what can we do about toxic positivity? I think the simple answer is you build a culture of feedback and you make voices heard. And I think this sounds great on paper, but we're talking about massive teams. And I think you have to figure out how to make decisions about what feedback is needed and what isn't helpful, how to make progress, but still ensure iteration. Since reacting to all feedback will lead to longer dev cycles, which inevitably, as I talked about, will turn into toxic positivity all the same when you're basically forced to close the thing. So I think like the solutions are actually a whole bunch of different things. Like, yes, we have to listen to feedback. We have to respond and build the right processes and forums to synthesize feedback rather than continually randomize the team. You have to have harder conversations as early as possible. Don't hide behind temporary assets or weak builds because there's an excuse to wait for true feedback. Have those harder conversations early. Find ways to be able to create those harder conversations early instead of hiding behind saying this stuff is temporary. It's all going to come back later on. And I think the hardest thing as leaders is we have to find ways to break out of our positivity. We have to lean on research, lean on external team members to give candid feedback. Find people that can snap you out of these things so that you can give a safe space for people to be candid, and look for signals when your team is reacting negatively and going to a place of being too defensive to teams like research and feedback. So it's difficult, but find ways you can effectively iterate, even when in production-like settings. That has a lot to do with tools and culture. And as well, I think some of the more difficult things is making sure you're setting the bar high enough from the onset. Don't wander into production with sort of a weekly competitive plan or like a comparative, we're just going to match what's already out there in the market. Assuming that you can kind of iterate towards your special thing. You've got to be able to nail that before.
I think you're saying things that really resonate with me in my many, many, many years of working with game teams. The hardest thing I ever have to do in working with a game team as a product marketing ninja, and now I do a lot with consumer insights, is how do I tell a team their baby is ugly? It is really, really difficult to do that. And so we try to do it in ways that's like, well, here's what's good about what it is, and here's what we need. Here are the, opportunities and barriers. And we try to put the goal out there and say, well, if you can get to, if you can make these changes, here's kind of the business outcome or the overall outcome that you can get. So I think what you're saying is, how do you be more open to hearing that feedback? One of the things that I do as your partner is I try to, number one, is play your game and understand your game better than just as much as you all do. And in doing that and cultivating that relationship, hopefully I start to earn your trust. Also, when we do consumer insights work, I involve the product team and the dev team every single step of the way. I ask them what questions they want answers to. That way, it is much more difficult for them to shit on the results if they were involved in the entire process. And I know that sounds like a Jedi mind trick. It is not meant to be that. It is meant to be truly inclusive, to make sure that as we go and we spend the time and money to talk to players, that we get the right answers. The other thing I would really recommend that people do is engage influencers and players at the beginning of the game development process, even at prototype. This is what we're seeing as like the new way of game development. I mean, you look at, we'll talk about it later, but you look at Roblox, like these people spend 2 weeks, they throw a game out there. If it resonates, great. If it doesn't, they throw it in the trash. And I'm not saying that AAA needs to work that way, but even, the big guys, even the Riots of the world and people that have left Riot are now involving players at the very, very beginning, because it's a lot easier to get that harsh feedback when you're at prototype than when you're 3 years in and you're like, oh shit, I can't change this. This is a lot of my current focus of what I'm doing as a consultant is at these early stages. And so I would just really encourage folks to be involved in research, really listen. Everything that you were just saying, Adam, makes a ton of sense. And then look at ways to bring in players and influencers earlier.
Yeah, this was a super interesting topic. Thanks, Adam, for bringing this on. When you posted this on our channel, I was like, oh, wow, let's jump in. I watched the video. The video was called Culture Killed Concord. If you want to search it from YouTube, much recommended. It's only 11 minutes, so it's a fun watch. Yeah, it is a fun watch. Very close topic, because as a head of studio, of several different studios, I've probably failed on this more than I've succeeded. So I was kind of like retrospective in many ways to think about this. My first take when I was watching this video of like culture killed a game was like, here we go again. It's all about the culture. And then I was just like in my mind hearing Simon Sinek coming in. What is your why? What is your why? and that kind of stuff. And I'm starting thinking about it, because culture in many ways is a very vague umbrella term that really describes anything and everything. Like Jen, you were talking about the importance of market research and talking to the players and so forth. That is part of the culture. So in that sense, it's kind of vague. There's no sort of a standard metrics to measure it. And very few companies have actually defined what their culture is. And even fewer of them have actually implemented the culture that they have defined. Yet every single company that almost is out there is promoting their culture that is for everyone and thus for no one. So I asked my good friend, ChatGPT, hey, ChatGPT, what is culture? and it told me like there are these elements, like it's behavioral norms, it's values and beliefs, it's work and environments, leadership style, rituals and traditions, communication style, employee engagement and motivation. As we can see from this, it's like very, very hard to measure. And when we think about the culture, does culture prevent you from making great games? That's kind of like a question that I was starting to think about, because I'm trying to understand correlation and causality. And I was instantly thinking about Rockstar, because they're famous about their culture to a point where everybody has an NDA once they leave Rockstar. We know these things, like their games are phenomenal. And we know from the news, like, for example, Red Dead Redemption 2, insane crunching that happened. Like we can, I think, all agree that crunching equals bad culture, right? Well, if we think about that way, then Red Dead Redemption, Fortnite had a lot of crunching issues. Fallout 4, like all these teams probably did not have the greatest culture, maybe, but nevertheless they were able to make very successful games. So I'm not trying to say that you don't need to have a good culture. Of course, it's more likely that if you have a good culture, you're more likely to make great products. I'm just trying to say that there's a correlation, but not necessarily a causality between a culture and product success. And another point that I was kind of thinking about is that I've been at companies where I felt, unhappy, but it was only me because the culture or the way of working of that company wasn't suitable for me. But nevertheless, it was very great for other people and they enjoyed it. And so in that sense, like it's very hard to say what is a good culture and what is a bad culture. But nevertheless, I digress. In this specific case, when it was discussed that they had a culture of toxic positivity, and I thought about like, what is the culture that is anti-toxic positivity culture? And in my opinion, not having worked there, but read the book, Netflix definitely seems like the type of a culture that had these elements. So I'm just going to mention 5 of these elements of Netflix culture that is in their wider culture book, like freedom and responsibility, where essentially when you make decisions, you're also accountable of whether they work or not. A culture where high performance, where they only hire the A talent and they're known for kicking out a person if they're mediocre performance, even though they try really hard. They have this infamous keeper test where a manager is being asked if the person were to leave the company, would you fight hard to keep them? A culture with candor that they're known for, where they give feedback and people are encouraged, especially to give feedback to their bosses, because when the boss makes a mistake, it's probably larger than individual contributor. The notion of having a team over a family and overall the transparency where data is giving to everybody so that they understand the context and the business of where they operate and can make decisions according to that. So I don't know, kind of long-winded, but what do you guys think? Like, is really the culture that killed it, or?
You mentioned like culture doesn't drive results. I think there's the Game Outcome Project, which was a while back, which I think looked at a pretty vast data set of game outcomes and had very strong evidence of causality in terms of culture's impact on the game outcomes, instead of just looking at the Take-Two examples. So like I would point to that. And I think they actually came up with a whole bunch of really, really strong factors about what they believed drove the outcomes of those projects. And obviously, like on all of those different axes, you have some games that lean more into crunch and they believe crunch did not help the outcomes, right? But like they also leaned in better onto other axes, and that's why they believe the outcome was strong. So that I would definitely take a look at the Game Outcomes Project for a pretty
Game
strong
Outcomes Project. I'll definitely look at that.
Yeah, on culture's impact, and then they go into specific elements around transparency and around candor of the team and how important that is for the outcome. Yeah, so I would say like yes, like team candor is a strong factor within, and I think Game Outcomes Project kind of proves it that candor is. And I've seen like the difference between teams that do have high candor or not. I just think that the nuance there is that it is really hard to enable high candor when you're in late production of a game and things are incredibly hardened. And so then producers have to move into that mode of like, okay, we got to make progress, we got to move. So there's one point of like, how do you have that high candor even more early on in production and predict the success more? But as well, like how do you build the right tools, engines, processes, so that when you can have that high candor, which is typical at the end of a production, you learn the most about a game, a year before launch, you have the best tools for understanding it. How do you make sure that then the team can pivot and iterate at that point? And I've seen sometimes when teams are built on bad engines or they're built on inflexible code bases, then they end up in a situation where they can't iterate. They can't act on the feedback that they've gotten. And now they're just launching the thing. So sorry to point it back at tech, but like that's been my experience.
So the point is more like some of these good qualities are overemphasized, like candor, for example, it's overemphasized over transparency and sort of a responsibility, which leads to sort of like imbalances. Is that the way we're
So it's just
thinking?
more like the high, we could cover it in a future podcast, but the Game Outcome Project listed a whole bunch of different factors that they believe like bubble up towards culture. And so they measure things like a high candor culture was a strong predictor of game outcomes, right? But it was just one of the predictors. Obviously, there's other elements that predict a game outcome.
There's a really great book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott. But please take away that candor doesn't mean you can be an asshole.
Yeah.
Candor means that everyone can express their opinions in a respectful way, a growth-oriented way. And yes, so just I want to make that plea.
Yeah, when you give feedback, I think it's in the book of the candor, it has to be relevant, meaning like it's coming right at the correct time. It has to have good intent, and it has to be actionable. And so those are, I think I was remembering, those are kind of like the key pillars, not just saying like, you know, you always fuck this up.
Yeah.
And you always have to kind of calm yourself down, even if you feel pissed before giving the feedback. But it's a really good book. I remember like I read it and tried to get everybody on it, but I found it even personally to be quite difficult to give candor feedback and create that type of a culture, because it is pretty rough. And
yeah. So there's also a podcast, which is great. And I think I've been pretty transparent about, I mean, my own challenges is my parents are New Yorkers. I'm pretty direct. I think you guys called me a taskmaster. I want to get things done. I want to do a great job.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, especially as a woman, direct feedback can be misconstrued as being a bitch. Whereas if I was a man, it would be, oh, I'm really direct and straightforward and super clear.
Asshole.
And so I've had my challenges over time where, you know, people say I'm intimidating and I'm mean and I'm rude, and it is a very difficult, and I've had to take that feedback and really soften my approach while still being candid. And so books like that, or Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, the FBI hostage negotiator, really helped me figure out, like, how do I have tactical empathy, which is the idea of you empathizing with someone, but still getting your point across. Anyway, all right. So let me close out on that. Let's get to Google and Epic. And Chris, I want to re-engage you. I'm sure you're in the background playing WoW right now. I know this is like
leveling
super
up.
painful, dude. Like if
yeah.
you know, dude, just
Yeah. All right. Well, okay,
just how about this? I'll give you a quick one. Just hire me. I'll tell you why your game is not going to work, and then you can go from there.
Well, or Stan and Beta Hat. Like, this is what we do.
Fuck Stan and Beta Hat. Just hire me.
What?
I'll do it for fucking free.
All right.
He's an alpha hat. That's what Eric is. He's an alpha hat.
And you want like direct feedback without like worrying about the consequences? That's what you come to me for.
Yeah.
Or you go to McKinsey and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on bullshit that tells you nothing, right? So yeah, just call me. That's all you need to do.
Yeah, first stop, call Chris. All right. So here's what's going on with Epic. Epic wins again and gets what it asked for from the judge in the Epic versus Google case. So I'm going to pull from The Verge. They did a really nice kind of summary of all of the different things going on. So Google's Android App Store is an illegal monopoly, according to the judge. Actually, according to the jury, because this originally came about because it was a jury trial. So it's going to have to change a bit. So at a high level, they have to effectively open up the Google Play App Store to competition for 3 years. Google will have to distribute rival third-party app stores within Google Play, and it must give rival third-party app stores access to the full catalog of Google Play apps unless developers opt out individually. And so let's just go one level deeper. And of course, this could all be held up upon appeal. November 1st is when this is supposed to take effect. The judge is like, November 1st, Google, that'll give you time to be able to do all of this, right? So they're appealing, obviously. So we'll see if this date actually sticks. They're going to have to stop requiring Google billing. They're going to have to let Android developers tell users about other ways to pay from within the Google Play Store, allow developers to link to ways to download their apps outside of Google Play, and set their own prices for apps, irrespective of Play billing. There's more. Google also can't share app revenue with any person or entity that distributes Android apps or plans to launch an app store or app platform. So this starts to go to like Samsung, the Samsung store. They can't do those rev shares. They can't offer developers money or perks to launch their apps on the Google Play Store first. And they can also not launch their apps on rival stores. So Google is basically like super constrained in what they're going to be able to do. They can't do rev shares. They can't incentivize people to do exclusives or not go someplace else, which is kind of weird, Chris, when I think about a little bit of the old school when I used to do, buy end caps at retail or do retail exclusives. I don't know. I felt a little bit bad for Google, but Mishka, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about, because this is kind of like a DMA territory, and I was thinking about like what are the implications for mobile developers from these rulings is like, first one is like, again, these are very theoretical. Like one is, would it increase the revenue opportunities? Because like now you have third-party stores that reduces the dependence on Google's platform and billing system, which means you can bypass the fees, which essentially increases the profit margin, theoretically. Number two is, of course, the diversified distribution channel. So if you have more different stores, third-party stores, maybe they could, encourage competition through costs. Maybe they will take less than 30%. Maybe they could help you with user acquisition. Let's say if Epic Store would have been as big as they probably wanted, I don't know if it will grow to that. Maybe that helps you with the user acquisition by having another channel there. But at the same time, like what definitely would happen is if there are third-party stores that have exclusive apps in it, let's say Microsoft launched their third-party store and it has Candy Crush and it has Call of Duty and so forth. Could that create a little bit of a confusion? Because we've kind of, as mobile gamers, used to having that one store, one payment model. Like what would happen when there's multiple different stores? It's just in terms of like consumer behavior, user interfaces, etc. And then the final one is like, what are the broader antitrust implications? Because this is a ruling that is stepped toward addressing the monopolistic practices of major tech companies. And in the Direct Market Act, like it says that there's core platform services like Play Store, and there are gatekeepers, which are entities that operate these core platform services, in this case, Google. And then from the lenses of DMA, App Store distribution is seen as a public good utility that needs to be operated in a way that promotes competition. So that's why the rulings are so interesting. And the gatekeepers actually have to themselves demonstrate that they're creating this fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory policies that aren't referencing their own products nor blocking competition. So having these sort of standards within the DMA, it really opens up the door for also future lawsuits or different regulations, and potentially that in the long run will affect most significantly app distribution as a whole. So that was kind of
are you using
thinking.
ChatGPT to give your take?
No, this one was from our podcast with as good of as ChatGPT, which is Archie Stonehill from Stash. So I opened up that one and just literally copied what I wrote.
He must be salivating. Can you imagine
Look,
those folks?
I appreciate the fact that, dude, Epic is winning the just fight. Like clearly, like they came out and they went against the behemoths and they are winning, and which is great and all. But from a consumer perspective, I still don't see how people are going to adopt in mass these type of alternative stores when they already have all their information input into Google or information into Apple, and like they trust that source. This is how they've been trained for the last 14 years on how to get apps, right? So now you're going to try to convince them to download a secondary store and buy. I mean, I think it's Herculean just on a functional level. But I think this is all great news, but it's just like the practicality of it all just seems impossible.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think we talked about this before, which is the friction of going through and jumping through all the different hoops. Apple and Google have made it so incredibly easy to make that purchase.
Yeah, and even if they fix that, it's still customers want to try a new store. Like, what would incentivize them to do that, right?
Well, it's why Web3 has been such a challenge. There's so much friction in that whole process that, if they were ever to fix the Web3 connectivity and the wallets, maybe that's going to have a shot. But I just don't think they can get there. All right, let's get to our last story, which is Roblox. So this is from the Hindenburg. I almost called it the Heisenberg, thinking about Breaking Bad. Inflated key metrics for Wall Street and a pedophile hellscape for kids is the title of the article. It is not my personal thing. And so Hindenburg is a short seller. And so Chris, I'll ask you a little bit more about them later. It sounds like They're like almost like the investigative journalists of Wall Street. So Roblox had a tough Tuesday after Hindenburg, a notorious short seller, came swinging in with allegations that the gaming platform is playing fast and loose with its numbers. The report accused Roblox of inflating user data and failing to protect its youngest players from harmful content. Naturally, the stock took a dive, so it was down about 10% in early trading, a steep fall for the platform that's been a favorite for younger gamers. I think it came back up a little bit from that initial dive. So the Hindenburg claims that Roblox has been cooking the books by counting bots and duplicate accounts as individual users. According to the report, Roblox DAU count may be overstated by 25 to 42%. And while Roblox claims its users are spending hours immersed in the digital platform, Hindenburg suggests a lot of that engagement comes from bots that are just there and they're bot farming. The bigger piece that was really disturbing was they painted a grim picture that the platform's safety features are just not there. They claim Roblox isn't doing enough to keep predators at bay, and for a platform with millions of young gamers, it's a serious accusation. Roblox wasn't quiet. They came out immediately and they shot back, calling Hindenburg's report misleading and driven by the short sellers' agenda. In a statement, they emphasize that the user safety is a top priority and that the financial metrics they report are accurate. Roblox's defense comes with some financial backing. The company saw a 22% boost in bookings year over year and reported $576 million in free cash flow for the second quarter. So despite their aggressive rebuttal, the stock fell 9.4% before regaining some ground, like I said earlier. So the Eye of Sauron is on Roblox on both of these topics. So Chris, first, talk to me a little bit about Hindenburg and why you think they targeted Roblox. But I think that all of these platforms suffer from, what do you call them, alts or smurfs or bots or fake accounts. I mean, we call them smurfs at Riot. They quote a former Roblox data scientist as saying, if the DAU numbers are not de-alted, I think the actual one would be anywhere between 20 to 30% lower. So tell me a little bit about how you see this.
Well, first of all, this is absolute scathing report on Roblox. We saw a similar report on Skills, not from the same firm, but from a different firm, which resulted in them ultimately going to almost zero. So, but despite the clickbaity headline, which I think is a little bit obscene, this firm is super legit. Like, you cannot ignore or deny them their qualifications in this world. This is not some MBA guy who's just throwing things out there to support his trade. Having said that, these guys short stocks. So they are short Roblox, and they say that in the report. And so they are hoping the stock goes down. But they clearly did their homework on the company. And I think they are absolutely right. And I've been saying this for years, right? Is that Roblox overstates their metrics. They have insane stock-based comp. The market is totally saturated, and they are promoting user growth at all costs without significant profitability. All of that I think is true. So that's what they got. But I think what really kind of falls down a little bit is their reporting on the content moderation stuff. And also from the profitability perspective, they have gone cash flow positive if you deduct stock-based comp, which is huge. And that's, I think, over the last 6 to 9 months, they've been actually profitable. But the content moderation thing is likely where I think the most attention is going to come, and the most kind of egregious things that they uncovered. I mean, it was horrific, like some of the content that they found. But to be clear, it is a fraction of a percent of the actual engagement is on these absolutely horrific type things. And these are likely the things that get pulled down from their pretty, aggressive moderation. So anyway, I think you have to pull it back a little bit. But nonetheless, some of the games that they pointed out, it's hilarious on the surface. Like, one was like, there's like the game where you can beat up the homeless people outside of 7-Eleven. This had 900,000 visits, right? Beat Up the Pregnant was the name of another game.
Wow.
Where users hacked pregnant women to death outside of Walmart.
What the fuck?
Yeah. No,
They got to pull that one down.
It gets
right?
worse. No, keep going.
We played Guns Work at a Hospital, where you can go into a hospital shooting Rampage. This one has 1.6 million visits and remains on the platform with no age restrictions, according to the police. And then the other one is the Palestinian and Israeli Hangout, which is super relevant these days, allows kids of all ages to purchase bombs, knives, and guns and attack each other. 13 million visits, 7,200 favorites. And then the last one, and I think the one that is probably getting a lot of attention, is that as posing as a child in Roblox therapy experience, a therapist introduced himself as a rapper with only one P, where he was advised to run away from home and would come pick us up so we could move into his basement and exchange paying rent with your body.
Oof.
So, whew,
That's from like Eminem rhymes, because that was his latest one.
honestly, I will be the first one to say this is not representative of the platform. I think they do a lot of other egregious shit in terms of the monetization that they do, but these experiences literally are a fraction of a percent. But Hindenburg is a very, 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 very well-respected firm, and they basically called DraftKings, this company called Nikola, and Clover, all of which resulted in huge declines in these companies, calling out insane activities of what were happening there. You know, Nikola shares went down 11% after the announcement that they were misleading investors about their technology, and now the stock is down 99.5%. It's basically almost out of business. DraftKings was down 50 to 15 in 12 months. Clover has been down 72% since they made a short stock call in 2021. So having said that, the stock has recovered, right? It's basically almost back to where it was before this announcement. It has been off recently. And there are also some fundamental things that are going on with Roblox that may actually hurt the stock in the medium term anyway. But if any of these type of things start to like kind of get uncovered and more research is done, and if any government agency gets involved, fucking hell, dude, Roblox is going to be toast. That's the big concern. And so I think from a Roblox perspective, they just have to get out in front of this and, you know, ensure that this is nothing to be worried about. But yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, there's a bill in the US government that is kind of stuck for children's online safety. Everyone agrees we should do something, but what we should do is always under disagreement. So if I were them, I would be aggressively trying to figure out how they can address that piece of it so that the government doesn't do it for them, and, you know, come out with their own, hey, here's how we're going to police ourselves and stop these kinds of things.
I want to be crystal clear here. They have the best content moderation in the business. Like, there's nothing better out there. They've spent gajillions of dollars. I mean, I know the guy that actually ran this motherfucking thing, dude. It is as good as it can be for such a big...
It's mission critical for them.
Yeah, it's a huge platform worldwide, hundreds of millions of people. So it's like, look, things are going to slip through the cracks, right? But ultimately, I think they do an amazing job of filtering things. I think the biggest thing, and I've been complaining about this forever, is how they misrepresent age verification, right? I don't think there's any effective way of really age verification for children, and I think children actually change their age in order to access certain stuff, and so I think that's the biggest challenge. And I don't think there's real incentive at the company to actually make that better, because they are selling a story about them actually raising the ages so that they can say that they're going to be making more money for the customers. The customers will make more money. I just don't think that's happening. I think that is the one thing that bothers me about how they report things. So
I think that's very true. We talked a little bit of what was the company Kid ID, who is trying to create some of that age verification. It's a huge issue. I mean, I think I told you the story of how my kids completely figure out how to get around any sort of age verification. They create their own email accounts with
You did it! You made it to the end of the episode. As a fan of the show, it would help us out if you subscribe and leave us a review on the podcast service of your choice. More importantly, are you a member of the Deconstructor of Fun Slack group? If you have 5 years or more of games industry experience, go to deconstructoroffun.com/Slack and apply to join. Join the games industry's best professional community filled with peers always willing to lend a hand. Or subscribe to our newsletter to get all the latest insights from the Deconstructor of Fun content creators. Thanks for listening.